Good morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum Fall Season. Bonnie Tsui is a longtime contributor to the New York Times and the author of the best-selling books Why We Swim, a Time magazine and NPR Best Book of the Year, and American Chinatown, which won the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. She lives, swims, and surfs in the Bay Area. In her new book, On Muscle, The Stuff That Moves Us and Why It Matters, Bonnie brings her signature blend of science, culture, immersive reporting, and personal narrative to examine not just what muscles are, but what they mean to us. Muscles make our hearts beat, push blood through our vessels, and allow us to move. Muscles also have defined beauty and distorted it through the ages, and they play an essential role in our physical and mental health. In 2021, Bonnie joined us on the forum online to talk about Why We Swim. I'm excited to have her here today in person to talk about her newest book, On Muscle. Bonnie, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here
Oh,
with you,
me too.
Malcolm.
I've been looking forward to this so much because I just feel like there's ways in which we're learning so much more about muscles than we knew before. And I do think it does mean that people in our generation, really benefit from it in terms of just like what our health is like, what our life is like too.
Absolutely. And that just means moving, really, because that's what they do for us. And I was remarking to you before we came up here that we had met online for that lovely forum event during 2021, and yet all the times we've actually seen each other in person until today, we're in the water surfing. So isn't that funny? And so I see Dean Malcolm in his
I know, it's so funny. I honestly, to see
incarnation.
you in clothes is the weirdest thing because I didn't even know what your style was or anything. And you've got a cool style.
I try to clean up.
Exactly.
Nice.
This is what I wear 6 days a week. But yeah, it's so funny. I do think, and you see me at like my best moments of the week, like I'm just so happy and dialed in.
We have
I also can't
smiles.
hear because I always wear earplugs to protect my hearing. So I'm always really conscious of being out in the water and that I can't like fully understand what everybody's
big conversation.
talking.
Okay, well, we're making up for it today.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I'll yell a little bit louder when I talk to you too. But yeah, this book is so extraordinary. I enjoyed it so much, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just kind of where the idea came for this.
Sure.
I mean, were you working on your swimming book and then thought, this is a little branch I'd like to follow, or was it something that you'd had in mind before that?
It really wasn't something that I was consciously thinking about until Why We Swim was out, and there was the wonderful reception to that and all these conversations I was having about the body and movement and how we stay connected to ourselves, to our communities, and also just to the larger world. And then I started thinking about like what is a way to follow that up? What is a way to kind of stay in conversation with these ideas and questions that were brought up in Why We Swim in a way that is different and then also maybe reaches a broader audience. And I came to muscle because of my father, right?
Yeah.
So
I would love to meet him.
A lot of people want to meet him after.
I bet. Next time he comes to America, you got to let us know.
So
Bring him to the beach.
Yeah, my dad is. So he, throughout my childhood, was a professional artist and a martial artist, and so my brother and I came up, in our childhood in his downstairs studio, not only learning about the body in aesthetics and art and the sort of tradition of art, and it's interesting to actually walk through the cathedral this morning and just kind of look at representations of the human body over time. I think about it all the time. Once you look for it, you see it everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But then, and then think about like Michelangelo, especially like portraying the body in such a way at that time that was revolutionary, right?
Yes.
And so Michelangelo is one of my father's favorite artists, and so we would have these lessons and talk about how Michelangelo, his representations of the human body were so glorious and really ecstatic because like he learned also from dissection, like he learned from understanding through anatomy, like real anatomic study, how the body worked, And so my father also was a black belt in karate and taught my brother and me to exercise, and like really he was bringing us all around and lifting weights and jumping rope and doing front kick, side kick, roundhouse kick, like throughout our childhood. And so kind of thinking back to that time, especially now because my father lives in China and has for many, many years, how can I kind of bring some of that foundation, personal through line into a new book.
Yeah, I just loved it because of just like that enthusiasm for just like living in our bodies and not just kind of going through the world just like as like brains in boxes kind of that where our bodies just carry it around,
Right.
But yeah, I loved that, and just his exuberance just comes out so much. I think last week we had Jack Clark, the head coach, the rugby coach from Berkeley here, and it was really great. I mean, one of the things that's changed so much in rugby is weight training. So if you look at the game of rugby in 1972, and you look at the game of rugby in 2022, I mean, it's really changed, and just people's bodies have changed because of weight training.
And women. And like too. The explosion of popularity of women's rugby.
Oh my gosh, completely, exactly. Yeah, so both those are huge changes. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how our understanding of our bodies and muscles have changed.
Sure. I think, one of the biggest things that has happened, two things in the last few years since I've been working on this book is, one is understanding the expansion of beauty, what's allowed to be beautiful for women, right? And strength and muscle and muscular form. And so you'll see a lot of women, now you would go to the gym and doing all of the weight training and in the weight room across all ages and bodies, that you wouldn't necessarily, like you would associate that with a certain kind of body and a certain kind of person. And that's sort of been what we have, gender-wise, across human history, it's skewed much more towards men. But now I'm so glad that women are understanding that muscle is for them too. And then the dovetailing with that is the, with these fitness trends, is the health trends, where the critical mass of like scholarship and research is showing us that muscle is so important for us throughout our lives, but most importantly as we age. And so you will then see, when you go for your physical to your doctor will say, man or woman, young or old, and especially as you're getting older, you've got to do strength training. You've got to lift weights, and that's for health, because your muscles are not just about looking good, even getting around, mobility and stuff. But it's that your muscles are mechanically moving your body around, but they're also endocrine tissue. So they are so important for your metabolism, your immune health, your cardiovascular health, and it's like about understanding that your muscles have their own intelligence in a way that we've only really given that credit to our brains, or our hearts or something like that. And that muscles are doing so much more for you than you understand.
Yeah, I was just thinking so much of it as supporting our joints too.
Yes.
So that is just like a whole another thing where I think in previous generations people said, oh, your hips and your knees are starting to be sore, don't use them.
I feel like you have a personal story with this. What are you thinking about today?
I always do, just as somebody who has arthritis.
Yeah.
And so people's approach to arthritis has changed so fundamentally, and it has a lot to do with muscles too.
Yeah, and then also that the more you move, the more your muscles are talking to all these other parts of your body, and it really is like this like lubrication kind of thing that's happening when you do move your body. And you think, oh, I don't want to, I'm sore, I feel achy, but as soon as you're up and moving, really wonderful things are happening from your muscles.
Yeah, and you do feel better the rest of the day after
Absolutely.
it too. Yeah. One of the most compelling characters in your book was Jan Todd, and I wonder if you could tell a little bit about her story as a woman who just gravitated towards doing weightlifting, and who just opened a lot of doors for other people, and opened doors too to what we think is possible.
Yeah, so Jan Todd is a world-class power lifter. She started lifting in the 70s and became this, she won the first women's powerlifting championship. She was held world records in many different weight classes for lifting weights. And she was the first woman to lift these Scottish stones of strength known as the Dinnie stones, which weigh 733 pounds. So that's like a male grizzly bear, I think. I'm trying to think about what's the weight of, and that she would also remain the only woman to do so for like almost 4 decades, and she did this in the 70s. And it was kind of like she was doing this in a time before Title IX, before women really lifted weights, and it was kind of like when women were told that not to lift weights because then your uterus would fall out.
I'm glad that's not true.
It's really not true. If you think about what the uterus is capable of, this is a kind of a ridiculous thing. But there's all kinds of like pseudoscience that's like circulating around the female body especially, and continues to really to this day. But that, it's so absurd to think about all these things that she was told when she was a kid, which is like her dad wouldn't even let her do ballet because he said, oh, your legs will be too muscular. Or her grandmother told her, you shouldn't run too fast because you don't want the boys to think that you're faster than them. And all this stuff. But she became this really incredible, sort of pioneer in weightlifting. And she also went on to become, she's at UT Austin. She is a sports academic, really respected sports historian. And so over the last 50 years, she's seen think about all the things that she's seen since she was doing this and breaking these boundaries and barriers for women and physicality in sports, is that she will direct the strong man and strong woman contest because of her at the Arnold sports games. These games take place every year in Columbus, Ohio, and she directs all of the strong people events for Arnold Schwarzenegger, for all, and she is the person who's doing this. She has seen all this, and every year now, since I've met her, she'll call me up and she'll say I just saw the most remarkable thing. These women were picking up 600, 700 pounds in the squats and whatever, and she's like the sports fan. She's so excited that the point is that, and she would get a lot of questions okay, what makes you so strong? Why are you so strong? And I started to understand in the reporting of this book and reporting her story, the more salient question is how do you know more people aren't? Because women have only been allowed to do these kinds of things very recently. And she said, men have been practicing weightlifting since, in all kinds of military capacity, sports, and competitions for many, many years. And women were only starting to become aware of what we're capable of. And so I find that to be so profound and so inspiring. And really, when we go to the gym and we see all these women powerlifting at lunch, it's in large part because of her.
Yeah, she sounds like an extraordinary person.
She's so funny.
Now, Terry Todd wrote for his dissertation a history of resistance training. I wonder if you can just talk about the history of weightlifting. When did it get started and how has it evolved over time?
Well, I love to go back to prehistoric times too, to think about
the Stone Age.
Right, the Stone Age of literally lifting rocks. In the there's a I refer to this in the book, but there's a passage in the Bible about lifting burdensome stones, right? And it's because it was a reference to these. That the youth would pick up stone boulders of varying sizes and lift them over your heads, and there is the not insignificant risk of when you lift these boulders up as a public display of strength that it falls on your head. And so there's this whole story about that in the book, but that just kind of flicks back to how far back these displays of strength really trace back to, and it is, again, largely has been across human history a masculine pursuit, and for all kinds of reasons, right? And that actually physical displays of strength, public displays of strength, would lend then a man, certain rights, or that a larger share of the fish catch, in Iceland,
or your higher status.
Higher status. You can marry this
leadership.
person.
Yeah.
You can lead this troop into battle, and all of this. And so it's been really fascinating to kind of unpack some of those stories and think about how still these ideas have influence over us today about who gets to be strong.
Your body is a symbol, and it's a very
for
powerful
sure,
symbol.
absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense from reading the book too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is so much in there about just different figures. You have talk about the people down at Muscle Beach. I used to live, you know, like
Really?
there, yeah, in Manhattan. I lived in Marina Del Rey, so I went past there every day, and I remember just seeing some of the same guys out there. And you talked a little bit about just guys who overdid it when they were young,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe too just about steroid use too. It's another part that you didn't talk very much about in the book, but I'm sure it came up.
Right. I mean, steroids could be like a whole other book, which is why I kind of
Book
only
3.
really touched on it. But there's a really wonderful story that I came across of Oliver Sacks, you know, the esteemed writer and neuroscientist who, I don't know if you know this, but he used to be this California state champion in the squat. And so he spent a lot of time at Muscle Beach, and he was known as like Dr. Squat. And he
squatted 600 pounds.
Yeah, 600 pounds.
That was amazing.
There's a newspaper story about him that's like I found in the archives. It's so fantastic. And he was like this very, you know, you think about him as he was portrayed in Awakenings by like Robin Williams, when he was like, you know, the bearded, like friendly, you know, older gentleman. And then you see these amazing photos of him when he was like a motorcycle guy and a weightlifter. I mean, really like hunky. And he lifted weights. He was very devoted to lifting weights because he saw it as a way, and this kind of gets at what you're talking about, where like muscle is a symbol, our bodies are symbols, and what it telegraphs to the world about our character is really not an insignificant thing. Like, think about all the things that we do every day to kind of shape our bodies to reflect to the world what we think is important to us. And so he was always talking about, in his memoir that he wrote before he died, he talked about how, you know, having a strong body and like having muscles specifically that would signal to the world something that he never really saw in himself. He always felt very timid, very shy, and to build his body up in such a way, he was seeking something, right? And then he would talk about how then he would like rupture this quadriceps tendon and then that quadriceps tendon, and he was laid up in the hospital, and he had this guy who he once revered at Muscle Beach come visit him. He's like hobbling into the room, and they're staring at each other, and like, boy, we were dummies, you know, like just kind of chasing something that wasn't really about the thing, wasn't really about the muscles, wasn't really about like what that was, but what it represented about like themselves.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that make muscle so special as a symbol and everything else. That we can change them. We can drastically change the way that we look. I can't make myself any taller, but I could make myself 50 pounds heavier, and in different ways. But one of the ways is with muscles. The other is with donuts. I don't recommend the donut idea too much.
I mean, I'm okay with the donuts every once in a while.
I'm the king of donuts.
We'll talk.
You know, one of the things I loved about the book too is just thinking about what muscles mean kind of across cultures.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, especially, you just barely mentioned it, but what do muscles mean in China, in Chinese culture?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, and then also talk about just kind of where are like muscle cultures really surviving around the world.
Yeah. So I was really interested, you know, because of my dad, obviously, growing up in Hong Kong. You know, exercise wasn't a really big thing in the 50s, and I remember him saying that when his dad was taking him spearfishing and skin diving and practicing martial arts, that he said that was actually kind of unusual. And so then he brought us up when we were growing up in New York to be, again, like his little ninjas, and he thought that it was important for us to learn how to swim, and, you know, like, hence why we swim, and all these things you see are kind of connected. But I do remember that my father was really into fitness and was really into a life of the body and physicality, interested in all of these things. And then his own father died when he was 62. I mean, it really was a shock. And I was 8, I think, I remember, and getting this phone call, and he had a heart attack. And, you know, at that point in time, my grandfather was like, he had smoked forever. He, you know, like drank alcohol. Like he just was not living a healthy lifestyle at that point in time. But it really scared my dad, like in such a way that he really doubled down on this life of physicality. And but I was really I started to kind of like think about, well, what are the differences between like, you know, sort of East and Western ideals of the body and a muscle, right? So I was kind of interested in tracing those back. And I really found these fascinating texts about, you know, like going back to, I think it was like 14th century texts of acupuncture. So like early portrayals of the human body, like in the East versus the West, and like Chinese medicine. It's like the body is, looks like a healthy body looks like a Buddha, you know, like a yogi with a full belly, and you're like, where are the muscles? But actually, there at that time, Chinese doctors didn't actually have like a word or a character for muscle. It wasn't distinguished from the rest of flesh and your mass more generally. And the focus on health was on qi, right? Like the breath and the life force in the body and sort of the flow of qi through the body. And in sort of like roughly contemporaneous texts, maybe like a couple 100 years later, like Vesalius, like the father of modern anatomy, really like had these, you'll see these texts that portray the body incredibly articulated with like muscles, like kind of peeling back layers, and sort of like study of anatomy kind of become more rigorous at that time. And then this sense of muscles being part of your autonomy and agency in the world, and that kind of traces back to Greek medicine. But before that stage, there was not really a difference like in the way that ancient Greek medicine, ancient Chinese medicine talked about health and talked about the body and physically. And then there's this divergence in Chinese medicine and Greek medicine about what is a healthy body and specifically like where muscles kind of figure in. And I just found that to be so fascinating, just to kind of understand how these sort of things kind of trickle down. And you'll see even in Asia, you'll like the kind of very muscular body is, I mean, you'll see this on Chinese TikTok. There's also things, you'll see anything, any kind of subculture on TikTok that you're looking for. Like you will see Chinese bodybuilders and you will see women who are like working out. But generally that hadn't been the case, and I think like in the globalization of our media, certain ideas are spreading. It's harder to trace all these ideas as they circulate and then take root. But it used to be that there was this kind of like more divisive like understanding and of like aesthetics, beauty aesthetics, like across countries and cultures that I think now is a little bit more blurred.
Yeah, last week we talked about just what the internet has done in terms of just like changing us as human beings, and Coach Clark was talking about just strategies and ways of training. All these things that would take a long time to disperse now are just like instantaneous.
Right, you watch a video and then you're doing it.
It's even more the case for surfing. I mean, that's the reason why.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why Maui surfers all of a sudden we started being conscious of them. They were on such a small island, they didn't get off the island that much, and then they just weren't exposed to what was happening in other places. But as soon as they could see the videos and start focusing on those maneuvers, it really changed things for sure.
Yeah, and that it used to be that surfers who had talent would try to compete, right? Like internationally, like that's sort of how you would become like a professional surfer and like get prize money and get attention. And now it's like a lot of these surfers who are young and talented, they don't need to do that anymore. They like develop their style and they develop their, personality and character in the water, and it's like broadcast immediately, like you get your followers that way, and then you have your sponsors, and you don't need to you can live your life as a surfer.
Yeah, that's true. Not have to travel to all these different places all the time.
Yeah,
it's so interesting. And we still just are barely understanding how these changes are affecting us. But it's so interesting to think of them as, you know, you're a bodybuilder in China, and the way your body has changed because of these new technologies.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, one of the people you talk about is Dan O'Connor, and I loved his story of him being the guy who jumps in the lakes. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just the way that our bodies, like what we do with our bodies, kind of shapes our interior life, and there's a kind of exuberance that we have in using our bodies.
So this is a chapter on jumping called Jumpology, which I love. So it turns out actually Charles Darwin had a lot to say about jumping as this physical act that was so much tied to like emotion and joy across species, right? So he obviously talked a lot about evolution and talked about emotions across species, and he pointed out that you know, whether it's a dog bounding along with its owner, or like a horse frisking, or like kids jumping for joy, that there's this like emotion of like getting off the ground and jumping seems so universal. And then I kind of push that to like whales breaching. I mean, you see
I love the whale section. I've been seeing tons of whales in the water. Have you been seeing that?
Yes,
yeah,
spouting, jumping, breaching. And so if you think about the largest animals in the world, these whales, like, it's very calorically expensive for them to jump out of the water. And so scientists speculate, like, why is this, right? Are they teaching their young how to do this? Are they working on like feeding techniques or whatever, communicating? And it's like, they do this, every single whale scientist, like in these research studies, you think about like these juveniles with their moms, like far from feeding grounds, like practicing jumping, breaching. And it's like, every single study is like, it seems so fun. They're having so much fun. Like, you know, the whales are not telling them that, they're not like somehow understanding what they're clicking and whistling and singing is, but it is something that we all recognize as that, right? And you're all laughing because you know what I mean. And when you see it, you can't help but laugh. Like, why do we go on whale watching boats to see like whales jump? I mean, it's just like this awe and wonder. And I actually have goosebumps thinking about goosebumps is another thing. Yes. Those are muscles controlling the hairs rising on your skin, and that is an emotion state. Like, this is not just about keeping us warm, but these little muscle fibers around at the base of your hair follicles, when you feel extreme emotion, often joy and awe, or fear, your goosebumps come, and it's like your body telling you how you're feeling, how you're doing. It's like a state of being. And I think that's like so much what jumping is too. Like, it's both an expression of the joy you feel inside, and yet when you're jumping itself, like that act can also conjure up this feeling of joy, this levitation, because your muscles are moving and working in this way. So Dan O'Connor is this guy I got to know because in the pandemic, I think it was like June 2021, he was like, he lives in Chicago. One day he just like biked to Lake Michigan and was just like so bummed out. Like his son had just graduated from high school, but it was just like, I just feel so crummy because like it's the day after his graduation party, and like, what is this life that what is this world we're living in? And he goes to the lake and he's staring at it and he's just like, I'm gonna jump in. And he jumps in Lake Michigan. And he was remembering when he was a kid, like growing up in like Martha's Vineyard, like he would jump. He would be spending all day jumping off diving boards, doing all these flips. So he started going every single day to Lake Michigan to jump in. And he started filming himself doing this. And then he became the Great Lake Jumper. And so like thousands of people were watching him every day on Instagram and on Twitter. Like the clip is like 10 seconds of him like running and jumping into the lake. And it's like, sometimes he'll have like a music soundtrack or whatever. And people started saying, like, people in Chicago started taking note of this, and like the AM talk radio guys were like, oh, but could he jump through Chicago winter? And then he's like, I'm gonna jump through Chicago winter. So like, it's 365 days later, and it's a year, and so all of these people have come to Lake Michigan to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the Great Jump, and like, Jeff Tweedy of Wilco is there, and he's playing, and he's jumping off, and then like, and Dan jumps off like the tower above like Tweedy's head as he's playing the song, which is Dan's favorite song, which is Spider's Kid Smoke, and he changed this lyric to reflect the fact that they are on a public beach in Lake Michigan. And it's just like, it's been now 1,000+ days. Like, I don't remember how many days it is, but every once in a while he'll go jump into each of the other Great Lakes, or he'll go on a road trip and he'll jump into other bodies of water. But it is this thing, he was just like, I don't even know, I was just doing it because it felt good to me, and it reminded me of how good it felt. And he kind of was super bashful about the attention, but he said, like, one day, I met him in Chicago, and we did a jump, of course. And he said that the day before, he was kind of going to his ladder and like going to do his jump, and he saw this family there at his usual ladder, and then he was like, oh, I'm not going to bother, I'm going to go to this next ladder. And the family was like, oh my God, you're the Great Lake jumper, we follow you, we watch you. And so the guy was like, the dad became the day's filmer, and like filmed him jumping. And it was like, he didn't understand how much joy he was bringing to other people. Like, and all they were doing is watching him jump. I mean, he's like, I'm this 55-year-old guy in Chicago. I'm terrible at social media. I have terrible camera angles, but I'm doing it because it feels good, and I don't know how long I'll do it, but I'll keep doing it as long as it feels good. And it is a real gift, I think, when people tell him that it makes them feel good to see him do it.
Yeah, I keep thinking of last week because my rugby coach was here, but he said, we were talking about rugby as being a combination of football and basketball, and no one had ever said that to me before, but I loved jumping when I was a kid, and jumping, dunking a basketball, jumping jump shots. I mean, I think that's the large part of it was, just that feeling of jumping. I just loved it. And it is kind of like surfing, where it's like this physical activity, and it just gives you so much joy. And
so two things, too, kind of bringing it back to the body, is that jumping is one of those fundamental movements we learn when we're kids, how does your body work, right? You're kind of judging the distance from the ground, and then where you're kind of trying to jump onto or jump down from on a playground. And also, it's something that we don't do very much after a certain age, and yet it's so important for all kinds of reasons, like weight bearing, gravity, muscle and bone density. Like, it's functional in a way that, I always go back to this famous Life magazine photographer named Philippe Halsman. You have all seen his photographs, even if you don't know his name. He shot those wonderful photographs of Marilyn Monroe jumping, that famous photograph of Salvador Dali jumping with the cats being thrown in the air and the buckets of water, and that one took like 27 takes, where they had to like throw 3 cats in the air and like buckets of water, and to get it right, where everyone's in the air and suspended and the arc of the water is going a certain way. And so what Philippe Halsman did was, at a certain point in time, he started to ask, like, whatever photo shoot he was doing with like Richard Nixon, Lena Horne, Salvador Dali, like, could be anybody, not even like just athletes, but of course like dancers and athletes too. Audrey Hepburn, you would get these like beautiful, elegant shots. But he asked them, he would take their normal portrait, and then he would ask them to jump. And it would be like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor who would get them to jump. And they would be like, what? And then they would take their shoes off and jump. And he had this wonderful subject, this famous judge named Learned Hand, and this guy was like 87 at that time, and the judge is like, oh, but I suppose, and he was getting ready to jump. He's like, I suppose this is not a terrible way to go. Like, but the photo of him is so elegant. He kind of jumps up. He is actually like in his suit. And Philippe Halsman would say later, and he collected all of these photos into what he called the jump book. And it's like this book you can take out from the library. It's so wonderful. It's like, if you want to be happy for an afternoon, take this book out and just look at these pictures and the quotes and the sort of backstories. But he said that whenever he felt kind of depressed, he would look at this picture of Judge Hand and just be like, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And Halsman grew up in Latvia. He was a very elegant and athletic person, so he jumped, and he would often jump with his subjects. Like, there's that one of him with Marilyn. I think they're holding hands because she's kind of bashful at first, and so they're jumping together. And he kind of had this phrase for the psychology of what he saw when he took these pictures of these people jumping, which is like your muscles. He called it jumpology, right? Kind of like a kind of Freudian play on like, you know, the interpretation of jumps instead of the interpretation of dreams. And just like, what does this tell you about this person's character? And it was like analysis of like, are you jumping with your legs together, or your hands like this, or your body tight, or whatever, because you can't control all your muscles at once, was this theory. And so there's this like unfiltered thing coming through. So actually, it's really quite wonderful when then you look at these pictures with an eye to that. And so actually when the Observer magazine in the UK came, you know, when On Muscle came out and they said, we want to shoot you for this magazine story. And I said, and they sent the photographer, and I was just like, all of these like still pictures. And I'm just like, this is weird. This is not who I am. And I said, can we do like a Philippe Halsman thing? So we went outside and we jumped. And that's on the cover of this magazine. Like just this jump of like, because you can't, that will be who you are.
Yeah, I love that. I totally love that. Yeah. I do think there's a way in which when we get closer to our child self, then that something comes out that surprises us, and it can be so beautiful.
Yeah, and that it's like this, it goes back. There's a primal beauty and purity to that movement. It's pure movement. It's movement for movement's sake.
One of the traditions we have on the forum is we take questions from folks in the audience. So I just encourage you to come up with your questions. And I, you know, when you talk about a physical activity shaping your interior life, I think of yoga a lot. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about those asanas, those forms that we put our bodies into, with an idea of changing who we are. Yeah. And I think of Matthew Sanford, as being as a wonderful example in your book of somebody who had a theory and philosophy about yoga.
Mm-hmm. Matthew Sanford is one of my favorite people who I spent time with for the book, and this is for a section of the book on flexibility. And it's sort of like, you know, we talk about muscle being representative in some way of like our character, and if you think about it, our language does give us away, right? We talk about being strong and powering through things, muscling through it, like having grit, enduring. Even when you're telling someone to be flexible, it's like a body state, but it's also a mental state that's connected to this. Or like, relax. You are not muscle. Even when you're not being a person of action, you are telling someone it's a state of mind and body together. And so Matthew is this yoga teacher and a pioneering yoga teacher, especially for disabled bodies. And so he started teaching adaptive yoga, again, bodies of all sorts. And he saw the power that yoga had for bodies of all kinds, and bodies that maybe were not being paid attention to. And he had personal experience with this because when he was 13, he was in a car accident with his family and became paralyzed from the chest down. And he was a kid who was like fully like in love with basketball, was like always talking about like the jump shot, feeling that that whole body connection. And so when he became paralyzed, he noticed that all the doctors would say, like, focus on your not paralyzed body, strengthening your upper body, and kind of ignoring his paralyzed body. And he always felt that was kind of wrong, because he was like, I am my whole self, including my paralyzed body. So how do I live a life that is integrated? And also, how do I teach other people to do that? And he always was talking about sensation in his paralyzed body that was not about like, it wasn't like he was miraculously having like nerves that were regrowing, he was having feeling, but he felt like every once in a while when his body was in a certain way or he was feeling in a certain way, he would feel like a hum, like where something is, where you feel like you're right. And I think if we all think about it, we do have those moments when our body feels right. And part of that has to do with posture. And I realized I subconsciously sat up and I put my feet on the ground, because one of the things he taught me in yoga was like, he would be teaching these classes where, I was sitting like this, I was kind of slouching, and yet if you sit up with your sit bones in the chair and your feet on the ground, and anyone can do this, I mean, even he was saying, like, in a wheelchair, I can do this, and you feel instantly more awake and alert. Like, you really are, like, grounded, because your spine is lined up in a certain way. Your feet are on the ground or on some surface that is grounded. And I'm looking at all of you, and I love this, that you're all sitting here, because, like, we all feel this, and we feel awake. And it's different than when I was like, and I was paying attention, but it was just sort of like my body wasn't making me as alert and attentive as I could be. And so his point is like, you can change how you feel with these subtle movements and these subtle poses. And in fact, like, sitting up and with your spine aligned, like, does a lot for every body, including a disabled body. And so there are certain classes that he will do. The first class I actually took with him was an online class that he teaches to, an adaptive yoga class that he teaches every Monday, actually. And so he would have these poses, and he'll be talking about what these are doing for you. And it's amazing like, I remember he said, I always had skepticism about what I could do to teach yoga, like, not in person, because he's such a, there are people who you're in the room with them and you're like, oh my gosh, this charisma, and you just want to do everything that they tell you to do. And he was just like, you can't really get that. You're not looking at people in the eye. And he said, but in COVID, we learned how much is possible. And so, like, he could connect with all of these people. And it's also an issue of access. Like, so many people then can take his class from all around the world. And that's like a remarkable gift. And so I went to Minnesota, where he lives, and spent a couple of days, like, hanging out with him and, like, taking yoga class with him, and just understanding, like, this person who has really lived many different lives and in different bodies, really. Like, and there's one thing he taught me that I think is such a signal thing in this book, which is understanding that we all exist on this continuum, from ability to disability. And if you think about this, it's really true, because a disability can happen suddenly, like with an accident, like with his accident, or slowly with age. We are all inhabiting bodies that change over time. And the things that we maybe could once do, that changes at every point. And so but that doesn't mean that you can't inhabit every stage of your body with grace and joy, and find all the ways that you stay connected and integrated to all of the parts of your body. It just was really profound and joyful, and I just found it like a really life-changing experience to hang out with him.
Yeah, yoga is a really important part of our life as a community. So we have hundreds of people who practice yoga here on Tuesdays and Saturdays. And it was, I mean, we've been talking about the way that our physical bodies have kind of an interior effect.
Yeah.
And that is like a group of people who really understand that, the way we are in our physical bodies has a spiritual effect on us too. And, it's not something that you just like so specifically, but it is kind of a theme in your book too, of just the way that the exterior affects the interior, and the interior affects the exterior too. We've talked a little bit about very strong powerlifting kinds of people. We've talked about yoga. I also think about just endurance athletes too. And I was so glad that you were attentive to that. What's the difference between endurance athletes and these other kinds of athletes, and how are their bodies and their muscles different?
Well, the classic example is you think of running, right? Like all these, because we are built to run, and we're built to move as humans. Specifically, our ability to run efficiently for long distances without tiring has led to our outsized success on this planet, for better or worse.
Yeah, you mentioned Born to Run, which I loved that book when it came out.
Yeah, Chris McDougall's book. It's just like he's such a wonderful, he has really, I think, broadened our understanding, expanded our understanding of what our bodies can do. And as creatures who, are born to run, like that our bodies are built in this particular way. The reason we have such a large gluteal muscle, our butt muscle, is like, or rather, the gluteus maximus is a reason why we are so good at running and have, again, had like the success we've had on this planet. It's so interesting because the glute, we're the only animal on the earth to have such a large gluteal muscle, and it just means that when we're run, it's like this kind of controlled falling, and it propels us in a way that keeps us from being injured, even if we're running for so long. And of course, endurance is like being able to do a thing for a very long time, right? And running is one of those sports, and endurance running, ultra endurance events that are like, hundreds of miles, like beyond a marathon, standard marathon length. And why do people do that? I mean, you think about why are we pushed? Why do we feel the desire to do this? And in a lot of ways, I think there's a purpose in it that, running and movement have meaning. And so how do you, like in this time when we don't actually need to run down animals in the savannah to survive, like run down our prey to eat, we can stroll to the refrigerator and eat. We don't need to do that. So what meaning does running still have for us now? And it's like, if you think about it, why do we have marathons and runs for all kinds of causes? Like, why do we do that? What is it about
you
the
mentioned
physical act?
thons, like a study-a-thon or a readathon,
right?
or a
Readathon,
mathathon.
bike-a-thon, swim-a-thon.
It's all
like,
a marathon.
and you raise money, and you're like, when someone is doing that, you recognize that they're putting their skin in the game. They're putting effort into the thing, and so you want to support that. And so it's like this funny social compact that we have made to honor these physical acts of endurance that are still meaningful to us in this time. So it took me a long time to kind of like unpack what it is about endurance and what meaning we attribute to it socially, communally, societally, that we do these things. And the story that I tell in the book kind of takes that and as the sort of groundwork for explaining and telling the story of Ku Stevens, who is this...
That section made me want to go to a track meet. I wanted to go to the
oh my
track
gosh,
meet and see
yes.
him.
He's a beautiful runner. So Ku Stevens, a few years back, was like the fastest high school cross-country runner in the state of Nevada. And he grew up in the Yarrington Paiute Reservation in Nevada. Tiny town. He was like a cross-country team of one in his high school, but trained, found the resources, like supported by his community to really excel. I mean, he is like an extraordinarily gifted runner, but also you need to be able to train. You need to find teammates to run with, coaches, and like, so coming from this tiny town on the reservation, it was like really difficult for that to happen. There's an amazing documentary called, sorry, my brain just completely blitzed out. Paige Bethman did this documentary on the Remembrance Run, which is a run that he did to honor his great-grandfather's escape from the Indian boarding school in Carson City. So many of you will know that across North America, there were these hundreds of boarding schools that kind of like stole Native children away from their reservations and families, communities over the last, couple hundred years, where they would try to take away, try to like remake them, and took away language, took away customs, took away their family, and a lot of these children died in these schools. And Ku's great-grandfather was one of these children who was taken away but escaped. So he ran 50 miles home across this desert, vast desert, and he escaped 3 times. And he was 8 years old. So
8 years running through the Nevada deserts.
Running through the Nevada desert.
For 50 miles.
Yeah, he was 8 years old. And so they would come back to his reservation and take him back, and then he escaped again. And then the 3rd time, they finally left him alone. And he lived out the rest of his days as like a very respected tribal elder. And he didn't talk about his experience, but people knew about it. And so Ku was told this story when he was 8 years old by his dad. And he never forgot it. And so like running was not just a thing that he did because he excelled at it competitively. Obviously, he wanted to like run for the University of Oregon, wanted to like be sponsored by Nike, wanted to, you know, be like Prefontaine. Like he was like a teenage kid who had these aspirations, and then at the same time, there's this layer of what is running in my community. Running is medicine. It's communal, and also meant like that my family is here today, that I'm here today. And so he decided to run a Remembrance Run 3 times, like over the last few years, to honor these kids who, some of them who didn't make it. And so I was fortunate enough to run on that last run, the third one, and it was an amazing, life-changing experience.
Yeah, and you're not, running is not your thing as much.
It's not my thing.
Like, I love running. The whole thing sounds great to me, but
So
you were such a good sport to really get into it.
I was like, I actually have to run part of this to understand. And I'm so glad that I did it, but it was something that I really dreaded. I used to run a lot more, but we talked about our joints.
And after starting surfing, like, why would anybody do anything else?
Exactly.
I used to go, the guy I used to go surfing with would play golf. I'm like, what? Golf?
My God.
You gave up this for golf? No, you learn so much about muscles and physiology and these stories about these amazing people. Has it in any way changed your approach to the way you use your body in terms of your swimming or your surfing or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate what it can do so much more. I understand what it requires to keep doing this and how important that our muscles are to allowing us not to just do all the things that we do on an everyday basis, but also do the things that bring us joy and buoyancy, like really levitation. Like it's just like these are things that our bodies enable us to feel internally, and really I do think about it as a spiritual communion when I go out to surf at first light, like to witness the world as it's waking up in this way. It is like very much fills my cup. Like I understand this community who I am a part of in the mornings. Like this is like very essential to like happiness in my life.
Yeah, definitely. We have a question from our audience. Now, these questions are always the best ones. So here's a great question. How can we get American men to celebrate strong women, like Malcolm does? It says in parentheses. I'm married to an outrigger canoe paddler who was a state champion. So yeah, how do we change people's perceptions about bodies? How can we work on this?
I think it's like slowly and all at once. We talked about Alona Mar, being this incredible rugby athlete, but also a person who has, she kind of like took the world by storm during the Olympics, the last Olympics, and when the U.S. won the bronze medal.
That was amazing, by the way. I was just,
oh my God,
it was
right? I know, you're just crying. You watch this
yeah.
joy and abandon on the field. Like it's just. That's what I love about sports, and I really do love the Olympics, that shows you all these different kinds of bodies excelling at all these weird sports that you never watch on otherwise, but that for one moment, in this Olympic cycle every 4 years, with the winter and then the summer. Well, it's actually, I kind of like it like every 2 years now because we get to see summer and then winter and summer. We don't have to wait that long for that feeling of like, celebrating these bodies that are capable of doing these incredible things, and also like the devotion and commitment that is required to do that. Anyway, but I think, with Alona Mar, it seemed like she kind of like single-handedly changed, people's perception of what like a strong female body can look like. But she had struggled like her whole life against that, and that now she had become this role model that she never had. And so it's amazing to see like all of these girls and women and also men, like really huge fans. Like she, rugby was always a men's sport. She is the most followed rugby player in the world. Like, she's a woman. And so, and like she regularly, the games that she plays in regularly breaks attendance records. And also like you see what's happening in the WNBA, like, the Valkyries, like it's just like huge, audience. There's a huge audience. There's a huge fan base. People are wanting this, and there's been obviously like structures in place that kind of like has kept this from happening in the past because, and there's all kinds of reasoning in terms of like not supporting these teams and these athletes with the same amount of money and exposure, media exposure, and all investment. Really, it's investment in these athletes. And now these things are changing. Again, like it's like it seems so slow and incremental, and then it's like and then you've got this huge like outpouring, and then things kind of like jump forward, you know, in a way that I think is heartening.
Yeah, I love that. Those are great examples. Now, your writing blends memoir, science, and cultural history, and I wonder, just as a writer, how you strike that balance. And you know, I wonder too, just what kind of projects you might have kind of on the back burner these days.
I think. Thank you for saying that, by the way. I'm curious. I'm a journalist, but I am also like a generalist in the most, really like the definition of the word is I have a wide-ranging curiosity, and I just want to be able to follow it, and that means telling stories that have like a multidisciplinary approach. The story always has to be a good one. You have to know how to tell it, but you also have to be curious enough to kind of like gather all of the different threads that, and I just kind of, when I start a project, I just kind of like think widely and talk widely to like lots and lots of people, and then kind of, I have to trust, and certainly that wavers from day to day, that the things that I find really fascinating and I can't stop thinking about them, those should be in the book, and they should be woven together in a way. Like the whole thing with the whales breaching. I was like, okay.
I almost used that in my sermon today.
Really?
Yeah. I have it in my notes, but I had to cut some things out.
Okay, so one of the things that I learned is that the whale has a butt muscle too, and it's called the peduncle. And that is that.
It's in Moby Dick.
It's the. Is it really? I didn't know that. See, I'll have to go back to that. But this is the muscle that's kind of at the base of the tail, and that's what enables the whale to kind of propel itself out of the water. And it's really probably like the most powerful burst maneuver in the animal kingdom, right? And you think about this huge weight coming out of the water on land, not a land animal, but in order to do what? To jump out and like experience some sense of what is it like up there, right? And
in a totally foreign environment,
right?
Yeah.
And that's joyful, and like they're spending.
Imagine if we could
all
just
these
burst into
calories
outer space.
I know. Well, yeah, some people do. I spent a few days I was like watching these research videos that are like attached to the top of a whale, and you can kind of see as the whale's coming out of the water, and I was just like obsessed with it and like narrating this whole thing, and I spent like 3 days writing like, I don't know, a page, but I was just like, this has to be in there, and if I feel this way about it, it's got. So I love that I can talk to you about this and you understand about
Yeah, like I said, I even if I don't use it for the sermon this week, I can see it using it another time.
It's like, yeah,
but it's just like if you think about just the amount of energy expenditure for just like this like thing that lasts just a few seconds.
Right, and it just is this wonderful thing to kind of tickle your brain, like, why are they doing that? What is the
and which gives us such great joy in watching it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is hard to believe, but actually we're out of time, which I can never believe. I just seem like we just sat down here. I still have tons of questions to ask you. I'll have to ask you in the water.
Yeah,
but you just got to speak loudly because the earplug.
Okay.
But it's so good to have you here. And we have copies of Bonnie's book in the back at the table. Please join me when next week our guest will be Paula Nesbitt. She's a professor of sociology and an Episcopal priest. We'll be talking about her transformative work in reconciliation across differences of culture, belief, and points of view. You're welcome to join us upstairs for the Choral Eucharist at 11 o'clock. And then after that, we're having a big parish celebration, Congregation Sunday. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including sending the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to the number 76278. And Bonnie, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in, and congratulations on your new book. And I can't wait till your future projects. I can't guess what they might be.
We'll have to keep talking. Thanks, Malcolm. Thank you all.
Why we surf.
I'll put that in my back pocket.
I have a feeling it's already in there somewhere. Thank you very much, Bonnie.
Thank you.